Hello everybody, it is Ebontis here, and today we're going to talk more about Godfall, and what I want to do is, my first video I put out was kind of explaining what Godfall is. So you've got loot, you've got action combat, kind of Dark Souls, you're in a fantasy world, a whole bunch of stuff going on, RPG stats and everything. So what I want to do now is break down kind of more details of those bigger topics that I covered into different videos, one each day up until launch. And then of course on launch day on Thursday, November 12th for PC and PS5, when I go get my PS5, this is what I'm going to be playing first, and then we'll get more content from there as we go, whether I figure out, tips about anything, that's going to come later. So if you are new to the channel, you're looking for Godfall coverage, hit that subscribe button and the alert bell, and you guys will see more Godfall content coming from me. But the order that I'm going to do these videos today is going to be weapons and combat. So I'm going to break down the weapon types that we've got, a little bit of details about each one, because we don't know everything about all of them, but we know a little bit about a few. And then I'm also going to go over combat and kind of the variations of attack types, special times to attack, certain things you can do, and just a couple general things that we've learned about combat from like videos and developer interviews and the website as well. So that's today. Tomorrow's going to be gear and loot. Going to cover both the rarity, what it's like for upgrading, enhancing, that type of stuff. It's not really crafting, but there's different things you can do to improve your items that you do earn, so you can kind of continue to use them farther along. And then also cover the other categories besides weapons, where you've got charms, rings, amulets, lifestones, and banners. That's going to be on Tuesday. Wednesday, we're going to talk about Valor Plates. Now, the Valor Plates are the armor sets. Now, remember in that first video that I described, you're not going to have like a helmet, arms, chest, and legs. You just get a full armor set. It has specific traits to it. It also has specific special abilities, which we'll talk about. We know a couple of them. And then each Valor Plate basically also has what they call a augment constellation. And basically what that is a chart. If you picture sockets from certain items like Diablo, where it's like you've got 3 or 4 gem slots and they've got different colors to them, same thing. You're going to earn a bunch of augments, and what you're going to be able to do is slot those into your Valor Plates, and you're going to be able to improve the Valor Plate stats, abilities, kind of playstyle, and stuff like that in there. Some may be for certain things. Final thing that we're going to go over is the skill grid breakdown. So there's a lot of skills involved. A little bit on the stats, how those kind of pair in, because those will kind of get a little bit of discussion in the augments. And then also the shield. The shield itself is kind of its own thing. Weapons and combat will kind of tie into that, but because this shield and has specific skills that we can see on some of the grid pictures that are out there, I wanted to discuss what the shield is capable of doing, when I could actually show you what it looks like if you, take your skill, pathing into specific shield options. So that's why we'll talk about that one on Thursday. And then Thursday, I'm going to be playing. So I will be streaming a lot this week on twitch.tv/Ebontis. If I'm not streaming, I'm probably making a video, and then I'll be streaming off and on a lot. So you guys can find me twitch.tv/Ebontis as well. But today, we're going to talk about weapons and combat. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the weapons themselves. The weapons themselves, there's about 120, they've said, in the game that are unique, all with their own unique lore, art, and obviously unique name to go with them. And they have a specific trait to them, whether they do a specific, buff or a attack type or an ailment. Maybe one does chill damage. Maybe one is, has better for, fill in the blank. They're all going to have something unique to them. Now, we have 5 weapon types. We've got long swords. Picture a one-handed sword, but decent size. A great sword, which is a big, giant two-handed sword. You have dual blades. Not quite daggers, but, very small, nimble, quick swords that, one in each hand. You've got a warhammer, which is exactly what you picture, a giant two-handed warhammer, slow, big smashing. And then you've got a polearm. So that's going to be a little bit more range. Actually does, not like throwing or anything, but more thrusts and things of that nature. A little bit more range than probably close up with the dual blades. And that one's going to be kind of a little bit unique. That one's able to be actually thrown, a little more weak point focus, stuff of that nature. Second half of this video, what I want to talk about is the combat specialties that you're going to be focusing on, weak point damage and soul shatters and things like that. And that will kind of help explain some of the things I mentioned as we go through the weapons. So first weapon that we're going to be talking about is the long swords. Now, long swords, as I said, are kind of a balanced option. They're kind of middle of the road. Dual blades are going to be fast. Warhammer's probably going to be very slow. but they have, each one are going to have some benefits to each of them, and you probably can play this game all the way through with one style if you fall in love with it and really get used to it, but there is some advantage to mixing it up. Because when you play with weapons, you're always going to have two equipped. So, say I have a longsword, it's kind of my middle of the road option, always do some swipes, you know, some cool attacks with it. Maybe I want to jump in, do a whole bunch of fast damage. Maybe my second one is dual blades. Or maybe I need more big slam attacks, maybe more area of effect. Maybe my alternate is a warhammer. So you're going to be able to mix and match, and you're always going to be able to switch constantly in combat. Like, you're going to hit a button and switch, and there's actually some benefits to doing that. We'll talk about a bit later. But long swords are going to be that middle of the road balance. So if you are getting used to things, it's probably a good place to start. You can string together, and each weapon is going to have, you know, basically a set of combinations that you can do. A certain number of light attacks, maybe followed by a heavy attack combo, things of that nature. They also have specific, like, weapon techniques, I think that they're called. And these are going to be certain things that either probably are going to be on a cooldown, but I haven't seen specifically a lot of stamina on some of these yet, so we're going to have to see where all the cooldowns land on the UI, because there isn't a bunch of UI stuff out there. There's a little bit on a video that came recently, but there's not a ton of UI information, so some of this is more just by taking notes on what they're saying as opposed to seeing it really in action. But the longsword itself has a couple unique attacks. You've got a Spectral Flurry, and that one is actually kind of almost a half a teleport, but a dash forward, and it's 3 quick attacks. And that one looks almost just like one of those that can't really be interrupted. It's pretty solid. Looks like it's just going to dash to an enemy, 3 quick attacks, knock him out. Probably want to dodge out afterwards, but it's a good way to jump in there and get some quick damage. And then you've also got the spiral technique. Not entirely sure why it's called spiral. I guess I'll have to watch the animation a bit more. But basically, you're going to do an attack that kills everything in a straight line. So as opposed to, you know, dashing forward and attacking one enemy, if there's 4 enemies and you can line them up, you're going to do an attack that goes through as many as you can, basically, for probably the distance it covers. So long swords, very balanced, kind of that middle of the road, not too fast, not too slow. Good overall work. All right, so the second option I want to talk about before we get back to some of the other swords is going to be the polearms. Now, polearms are going to be faster, probably not as fast as dual blades, but they might be number 2 for speed. Just have to see how it is when we get our hands on them. But they are going to work more in a thrust fashion. So instead of a big swipe like a sword, these are going to be more of a stab direction. You're still probably going to swing and slice with it a little bit. It is going to give you a bit more range because the polearm is going to cover, you know, a longer distance from your hands as you swing it. So those actually seem fairly cool. It does look like there are certain things that each of the weapons are going to do. The dual blades, when you get to them, are going to have like a specific ability, which is like inner focus, but we'll get there in a second. Haven't seen all the details on the polearms yet. But the nice thing about the polearm is you can actually throw it from a distance. Now, it's one of the only ones that can be truly thrown directionally, kind of aiming. And when we get to weak points, this will make a lot more sense. But when an enemy attacks and they're kind of exposed, there'll be a weak point. Well, if you're out of there, you're going to be able to use a polearm and throw it at that weak point, kind of get that big piercing shot. If you picture Troy, when they throw the spear, same principle. You're going to be able to throw this thing like a spear, and that one's actually going to be really, really cool. So the polearm, it's going to be faster, a little more precision-based depending on your playstyle, but also you're going to have one of the few ranged attacks in between all the weapons, and that's one of the cool things about the polearms. Now, the third one is going to be the warhammer. Got to talk about this one because it kind of ties into the other two. Now, the warhammer is going to be more about smashes, area of effect damage, and then almost like slowing enemies down as you kind of hit the ground and shake them and stagger them and things of that nature. It looks really cool. Now, there is a point where you actually get to see the warhammer get thrown. Kind of almost looks like a big boomerang as it spins around and comes back. So, again, more area of effect. And they mentioned when they talk about the warhammer, a lot of CC, which basically means crowd control. Whether you're staggering enemies, slowing them down, knocking them back, that's likely what you're going to see the warhammer be really good at. That's where you're going to see the warhammer excel, is big smashes for probably good chunks of damage. But it's probably going to be a little less focused on like weak points and precision, more about like large areas, groups of enemies, things of that nature to manage. And that could be a cool thing. Maybe you go for a couple big slams, you stagger a group of enemies, and you can switch over to another weapon, go for a little bit more precision, quick hits, and take the enemies down with a combination of both your weapons. It's cool that you get to use both. So that's kind of a nice thing. Now, once we go from the Warhammer, we're going to talk about two different types of swords. You've got the Great Sword, which is your big two-handed sword, and then you've got dual blades, which is basically the polar opposite. Now, great swords, they are a two-handed weapon. Big, slow, but if you picture the hammer as big smashing area of effect, this is going to be the alternate. It's going to be slower, but still more precise with the swipes and things of that, that type of effect. It is, again, not completely clear until I get my hands on the weapons of how they're all going to work. Probably one of the first videos I'm going to do. As I get weapons, I'm going to probably record what the combinations are, how they play, how they feel, kind of, what's going to be the best one for everybody. It's probably going to be more preference than anything, but at least if I can give you guys a guide in how they play in the game, like getting my hands on them for a little while. I may not have the best great sword when I start, but if I get like one of each weapon, I do want to try out all the styles and hopefully explain more about all the little details of combat, the abilities of each one. As I said, they have the weapon techniques, like the longsword has that spectral flurry, which is that dash and that like triple attack, and then also the spiral kind of strike straight through multiple enemies. We don't know too many of the other options. That's why the great sword is one of those I want to get my hands on and kind of see how does that risk versus ward play. It's a slower slicing weapon. What are the benefits? What are the unique moves that it's going to have? But great swords still seem fairly cool. Looking to see what those have to offer. The final one are dual blades. Now these are two blades, so you're one in each hand. And nice thing about these, they're quick. You're going to be able to do, quite a bit of damage, slashing very quickly. You're going to be able to get in, get out, get a couple swipes, get out. So it's going to be more of a nimble-based play style, I would imagine. There are two, weapon techniques that we know about so far. They say the first is going to be inner focus. Basically, it buffs your damage for a short time. So it's one of those that's probably going to be on a cooldown. I would imagine you just can't buff yourself all the time. But you go in, and again, if you switch over, say you stagger a bunch of enemies with the hammer, switch over to your dual blades, pop your inner focus if it's ready. I don't know how the cooldown's going to work. And then you go, they're kind of staggered and slow. You go and pump a lot of damage into a lot of enemies, knock quite a few of them out. Second one is going to be called Mortal Coil. Basically lets you throw one of your blades to an enemy. And then actually the cool thing, it lets you pull them to you. If you picture Scorpion in Mortal Kombat, that's basically what's happening. It's like a grappling hook, and then you pull it to them fairly quickly. So if you want to pull an enemy away from a group to focus on them a little bit, there's like 3 or 4 enemies in a group. You want to back up and pull one away, really focus one down. That might be a way to do it. Now, I'm sure there's some enemies you can't do that to. You probably can't do it to a big giant boss. So there's certain times where this may not benefit you, and maybe, better to use other weapons at other times. But for groups of enemies, smaller ones especially, pull an enemy to you, knock them out, and that way you're not worried about the other 3 enemies that are around you. So dual blades, fast, a lot of damage output. There's some cool like jump attacks, it looks like. Again, I want to get my hands on all of the weapons, really go in full detail about each of them. Can't wait to kind of go, a deep dive on each weapon type. So look forward to those type of videos as well. So overall, we've got some really cool weapon types. Long swords, pole arms, those are kind of your middle of the road. War hammers and great swords, two-handed, bigger and slower. And then dual blades, those are going to be basically the fastest, quick options, in and out, a lot more nimble playstyle. So those are the weapons. That's as much as we kind of know at this point. From here, what I want to talk about is combat and some of the variations of how that works. So now that we've talked about the weapons, what I want to talk about is combat. Now, combat is going to probably have a feel of any action-oriented game, from Star Wars Fallen Order to Dark Souls to Bloodborne. Picture that type of thing. You're using melee weapons. You're going to be up close and personal, and the enemies are going to be pretty punishing if they do connect with you. That's why understanding, enemies' attack patterns, knowing when to dodge is going to be important for many things that we're going to talk about. And there's different things that you can do, different exploits you can use to take advantage of attacking these enemies in different way, and then triggering things to happen. Many of the things that I'm going to mention here are going to basically cause something to happen based on your gear. The first one I'm going to talk about is weak points for a second, and I'll get to that here in just a second. But for example, I have a charm on my character that says I do 30% extra damage on weak points. So if I hit a weak point when I can see one, I'm going to do 30% extra damage. Now, if I equip a bunch of stuff that is based around weak points, and I'm good at that type of playstyle, when it comes to a time where I dodge and that weak point is there, I may be doing a lot more damage than normal because I built my character around that. It seems like with the gear, you're going to be able to do a lot of building around a playstyle, and we'll cover more of that tomorrow when we talk about gear and all that type of stuff. But each of these things I mentioned, they all seem to be able to be a trigger of something or, build gear around that said action. So the first one is weak points, as I just mentioned. Basically what a weak point is when an enemy attacks, they may connect with you, and I don't know how quickly you can, get back up. You're probably going to be pretty staggered. Most of the time in these games, you don't want to get hit. So if you get hit, your best bet is to probably get out of there and recover for a second. But if they go to swing and do a big heavy attack over the top and they miss, like you dodged the side at the right moment, what's going to happen is at that short little window that they're basically vulnerable. They've overcommitted on attack. They're kind of exposed. You're going to see a red dot appear on that enemy. If you can aim your reticle, so you're actually going to be doing a mini game of aiming while you go to swing, you're actually going to be able to hit their weak point. And as I said, if you have a piece of gear that does like 30% extra weak point damage, and then you might have another piece of gear that says if you hit a weak point, you might gain 25 health. So you're going to hit that weak point. Both of those things might happen. You might hit a little bit harder for 30% more damage. And if I hit that weak point, I'm going to get a little bit of health back. So that's the big thing. When you go to hit, when you go to hit an enemy, if your playstyle is built around weak points, you can set up your gear to take advantage of that. But it's all about more of a defensive setup because you need them to attack, kind of expose their weak point, and then go for that weak point shot. So weak points are one of those that you can probably do a lot of, benefit off of. You could build an entire playstyle around it, but it also depends on the weapons you're going to be using. A longsword probably feels like it would be good for this. A polearm, as I said, maybe an enemy dodges and you dodge back away and you dash pretty far away. Well, a polearm's one of the few. If that weak point is there and you can aim it right, you can throw your polearm and hit that weak point, which is really, really cool. That's why that polearm's got a bit of a unique playstyle to it. But overall, you see that red dot. If you hit it and you get that weak point bonus, you can get something off of it depending on what your gear is showing that you're going to do. Now, the second thing that they've mentioned is breach. Now, breach is basically a gauge that you're going to fill up on an enemy. And what this allows you to do is you're kind of building this breach bar. Now, there's a couple different bars that I've seen in health meters and stuff like that, and I only saw them recently, so still trying to kind of wrap my head around all this stuff too. But as you continue to damage an enemy, you're going to build up a bar. It seems like it's going to be underneath their health bar. So it's a separate one. As you take their health down, the breach bar is going to fill up. Now, as you build that up, depending on, say it's a beefier enemy, you may take only about a third of the health down, but maybe the breach bar is full. But whenever the breach bar is full, what you're going to be able to do is something called a takedown. Basically, you're going to fill their breach bar. When that happens, they're going to be kind of stunned, staggered, almost you picture like, the stars spinning around their head in an old boxing game. And at that point, you can go for a takedown. And what that looks like is the only animation that I've seen is they kind of knock them over and then they do basically like a shield slam in their face. They do a lot of damage. Now, depending on the enemy, this may kill them. Very easily could if it's a lower level enemy, but you also may just kill them with your attacks. But if this is like a mid-level enemy, you hit that breach bar, you get that takedown, that's going to be a huge chunk of damage that you're going to be able to take off of that enemy. And then maybe if they get back up, your takedown may have taken off another third of their health, and then you might be able to finish them up with just that final third. So breach is all about getting the damage off, and this is where you can build, again, a playstyle around this. Dual blades with very high breach. You're probably not going to do as much damage to them with each swipe, but if you're building up that breach bar very quickly, you may build yourself around dual blades, high breach damage, and then a lot of takedowns that you'll be doing as well. So that's a whole different build, completely separate from weak points. Almost a completely different play style as well. So it really is going to kind of depend what you fall into feeling comfortable doing as you're playing through Godfall. So breach seems really cool. Basically, it's a way to set up as once they get stunned, it's almost like in a fighting game, you walk over to and do like a grapple slam of some kind. Seems pretty cool. I'm very excited to see how much I use that one actually. The third type of attack is going to be a soul shatter. Now, we're in a fantasy realm, and we're in all these elemental places dealing with gods, so of course they're going to use something like a soul shatter. The idea is there's another bar, and this is when I say all this, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of bars going on in there. They're going to have a health bar. They're going to have a breach bar underneath it. But as you're attacking them, they're also going to be building up a soul shatter bar, and that's going to be actually on their health bar. And it seems like the closer you get down to the end of their health bar, the easier this is going to be able to fill up. And basically what this is a finisher type move. If you've seen Destiny finishers, Doom Eternal finisher, things like that, you may not have done, and this is again, you may set up a build of gear around Soul Shatter so you can build this one up quicker, kind of a whole different playstyle there. And this one, what it will do is actually cause an explosion in the enemy when you go for that Soul Shatter move. Now, I don't know if this is on a cooldown, if you can only do this so often, if you can finish people all the time, maybe it's cool, but it looks like it's going to have a whole separate system from Soul Shatter versus Breach. And I don't know how complicated this is going to get. If there's something like, if the thing about the explosion is when they explode, they're potentially going to be damaging enemies around them. So Breach might be one of those where you do a bunch of damage, slam them down. That's good for a single person. But maybe you want Soul Shatter on a couple low-level enemies. You Soul Shatter one, and if you have gear that's going to set up and explode to all the others when that Soul Shatter happens, maybe you cause maybe you freeze or chill all the enemies that are nearby. That's going to be a completely different thing. So you've got Weakpoints, you've got Breach, and you've got Soul Shatter. So they're all different things that are going to be happening in combat as you watch the health bars. Very different playstyles can be built around each of these things. The final thing is you have 2 weapons at all times. I don't know if I said this earlier, I may or may not have. But basically the way it works is, as I've said, there's 5 different weapon types. You can't take 2 great swords in. You have to have 2 different types. That's kind of a key, otherwise your build would probably be a little OP if everything was based around one type. Because what Polarity will do is, as you're using the weapon that you have equipped, say I've got a long sword equipped, I'm swinging with it, doing some damage, over time, and I don't know if this thing stays built over time, if you've got to do it within the same attack grouping, or, I'm not sure how the cooldowns are going to work, but basically they stated, as you attack with one weapon, you're building up the polarity on the other weapon. And if you get to a point where the polarity on that other weapon is full, theoretically, what you'll do is you're going to switch weapons. When that happens, something may happen. Maybe based on your armor plate, maybe based on your gear, but you're also going to get a damage buff. They said it was for about 30 seconds. Now, that's actually not too shabby, which is cool. But the idea here would be you're working on a boss or something like that, maybe a bigger, beefier enemy, or a big group, or a large wave of enemies, and you're working with a long sword, you're building it up. And say you fill up the polarity on your Warhammer, for example, and it's a big wave of enemies. Well, if you fill up that polarity on that Warhammer, you switch over, now your Warhammer's been buffed, and now when you're doing those big smashes on AoE areas, lots of enemies to hit, you're doing it with a lot more damage. So what they basically wanted to do with Polarity was give you an incentivized, basically they wanted to incentivize you to use both weapons. So if I'm going through and playing my normal playstyle, dual blades, I'm quick and everything, but I've always got that Warhammer in my back pocket. If I fill up that Polarity and I switch, bam, big damage buff, slow attack, smashes down, couple enemies, or one big giant slam. However you want to do it, you're going to be able to switch back and forth between weapons all the time. But there will be a benefit in saving that polarity charge, and when that is full, you're going to get that polarity bonus when you switch, which is really, really cool. So that's the general nature of combat. You've got 5 weapons: long swords, great swords, dual blades, warhammers, and polearms. And then as you're playing through the game, you can exploit weak points, you can build the breach bar and work on takedowns, you can work on speccing yourself out to take advantage of finishers and those shattering explosions. And there is a benefit to using both weapons, and when you switch back and forth, that polarity charge can really give you an extra bonus, maybe in a time where you really need to stagger the boss, there's almost done, switch over with that polarity buff, go for those final big swipes or something. I'm really curious to see how all of this stuff comes together, because that does sound like a lot going on, but overall, that also seems like very cool stuff to work with. So I know this was a longer video, but I wanted to kind of break down the best of it that I could, explaining each one of these weapons for at least what we know, and then also these attack types as well. So if you guys did enjoy the video, drop a like below, and as I said, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to have a lot of Godfall content coming to the channel. Game looks very fun. I'm really looking forward to playing it. If you guys want to find me on Twitter, it's twitter.com/Ebontis, and I also will be streaming all of the stuff that's coming out. I'll be streaming on twitch.tv/Ebontis. So thank you guys very much. Hopefully enjoy this one. I will see you tomorrow for the gear and loot video. Lots to discuss there as well. See you then. Have a good one.